CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. More than 700 Palestinians killed in Gaza by airstrikes in the last 24 hours as Israel intensifies its bombardment of the enclave. Brutality and mercy, the description of her treatment by one of two elderly hostages released by Hamas on Monday night. President Macron says France stands with Israel today, tomorrow and the day after, but calls for a decisive relaunch of the Palestinian peace process. And Spain's socialists team up with the hard left in a deal which could see a new coalition government 3 months after the country's elections. More than 700 Palestinians were killed overnight in Israeli airstrikes, the highest daily death toll since Israel began its bombing campaign in Gaza. Israel says dozens of Hamas militants were killed in the strikes. Diplomatic efforts are underway in the Middle East, with France's President Emmanuel Macron the latest to meet Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Meanwhile, China's foreign minister will talk to his American counterpart later this week. Wang Yi is quoted as saying that international law has to be respected and civilians need to be protected. Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid has the latest on the conflict affecting ordinary people on both sides.
4 of the kidnapped civilians from 2 weeks ago have been released by Hamas. Not many will have experienced what 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz experienced. Taken on a motorbike into Gaza, her daughter translates her story.
There they walked for a few kilometers on the wet ground. There are a huge network of tunnels underneath. It looks like a spider web.
There is political focus to avert more bloodshed. Emmanuel Macron arrived in Tel Aviv. His first meeting was with Israeli French families. And before meeting President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, he met Israel's President, Isaac Herzog.
This is an awful crime to play with these lives of children, adults, all people, civilians and soldiers.
Meanwhile, aerial bombing of the Gaza Strip goes on. 704 are reported killed in the past 24 hours. The latest footage shows how much parts of Gaza has been devastated. Makeshift refugee camps are at best inadequate, without basic needs to cater for families.
I use bottled water to try to clean everything. The children's hands, their bodies, at least to get the sand off. I can't even bathe my children. I don't have water. I don't have space to wash them. I can't find clean clothes. I don't have clean floors for them to sit on. I worry about their health. They cough and their nose runs at night. My oldest son has asthma.
The constant threat of airstrikes and the waiting to see if this war intensifies, should Israeli tanks and troops enter the Gaza Strip on the ground, make it harder for the authorities to help ordinary people.
The crowding of civilians and the fact that most schools are now housing a large number of people is the prime breeding ground for disease to spread, like problems with stomach disease, lung infections, skin rashes, and this is what we've seen in most of the patients coming into this hospital for treatment.
As diplomats and leaders shuffle between both sides to encourage a temporary ceasefire at least, Israel's reservists are still camped on the Gaza border.
We have long weeks of fighting ahead of us, and we will act at the most suitable operational timing and according to political instructions.
The focus in the past 2 weeks have been mostly on the suffering in Gaza and in Israel on the deaths of 1,400 Israelis and the more than 200 hostages. But there's deep concern that protests in the West Bank and military incursions by Hezbollah in Lebanon could trigger a much wider conflict. Yolo Abdavid, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Israel now and talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Joe Jachin. France's President Macron meeting the families of kidnapped French hostages. What more do we know about that?
Well, we know that there is multiple diplomatic efforts going on, as we heard from the Time of Israel, citing a senior diplomat saying that Israel and Hamas are now in an advanced negotiation through Egypt and Qatar to release 50 more hostages in the package. We know that this morning 2 elderly Israeli women were brought to Tel Aviv for further medical observation. According to the 55-year Lifshitz, the Hamas took the captive through an underground network to an area that where they have those daily necessities, for example, like a shampoo and a conditioner, and also her injured husband actually was given antibiotics by the paramedics, and he also she also carried a really important message to the public that Hamas prepared this and issued warnings of the attacks some 3 weeks ago. And she also, from the previous video, we also saw Lifshitz shake hands with the Hamas militias before, after being released. In Hebrew, said Shalom, which means goodbye and peace. And that also has been calling on, we see the protests in the downtown Tel Aviv calling on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to expand efforts in negotiations. And this is also we see this kind of things, efforts being made. But of course, we understand, this is the second pair. We expect more, but still this is the kind of a knack between, different parties, and they will just try to weigh in these negotiations, try to save more. As we see now, we have about 200 hostages still being held in Gaza by Hamas, and also reports say that there might be about 22 being killed in either, we cannot identify the Israeli airstrikes or the Hamas airstrikes. As we speak, actually, we just heard several interceptions conducted above our head. This is not kind of like the negotiations atmosphere. We know that the two sides are still exchanging fires, but we still have no idea the timing of the offensive, the ground offensive, as we are now talking about. But we also see that the Israeli side are showing its willingness to delay this offensive.
Joe Jachin in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. Well, hopefully we'll be able to talk to our correspondent in Gaza in just a moment. But before we do, let's talk to Yossi Mekelberg, who's Associate Fellow for the Middle East and North Africa at the think tank Chatham House. Good to see you again. Welcome back to the programme. So as we were hearing there, we've seen 2 more hostages released by Hamas. What do you think that says about where we are in the conflict and what might happen next?
Hello. This is the interesting thing, because on the one hand, everyone expects an Israeli military incursion, but at the same time, we see some moves to release hostages, and maybe this is part of Hamas' delay tactics. The more there is expectation for hostages to be released, the more there is a chance of a delay. Then they can regroup, or even maybe the pressure on Israel not even to conduct a military incursion, the ground offensive. But bear in mind, there are around 220 hostages at the release of 2 every day. If this is the rate, it means we are at a rate that will take 3 months or more to release all of them. So this is part of the type of communication between Israel, Hamas, but also external forces, powers, whether it's the United States, Europe, Qatar, to try to see how to diffuse the situation, knowing that the possibility of a ground offensive is very likely.
So given all that, do you think a ground offensive will now happen? Will it happen in the way that people initially thought it would?
Well, that's the thing. I believe that the likelihood of a ground offensive is high. At the same time, probably different what we probably thought about it had it taken place 2 weeks ago. It might be more surgical that we expected. It might also, there is no doubt that the anger in the first few days, the call for revenge were so strong that it might have affected, or it was bound to affect, those who take decision. 2 weeks later, there is more understanding, also more pressures from other actors, either regional or beyond the region, the United States and Europe, that need to think about any military operation also in terms of political objectives, not just about punishing Hamas.
So you were talking there about the regional, international actors taking part in this. Do you think a ground offensive will make a spread of this conflict inevitable?
First of all, we need to understand that any military operation of this sort, even if it's a limited, will actually end with more casualties on both sides, but also of many civilians. We already seen it over the last 2 weeks. And the count of Palestinians killed is more probably around of 5,000, and any further operations will increase that. This will agitate the region among many countries. So this has to be taken into account. It can have a destabilizing impact on the region. Now, there is always the possibility, the worst thing get in Gaza, that then the Hezbollah, under the influence of Iran, might decide to join in from Lebanon, maybe from Syria, and then we enter into the new dynamic within the region. Last week, we witnessed a missile and drones launched from Yemen towards Israel. So yes, we are in a very dangerous, very volatile stage of this conflict.
Yossi, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Yossi Mekelberg from Chatham House. Well, let's go to Gaza now and talk to our correspondent there, Noor Harazin. So, Noor, we've had more airstrikes overnight and today. Tell us what's been happening.
Well, what happened overnight around the Gaza Strip is happening right now here where I'm standing. Israel has intensified its strikes on the Gaza Strip in northern Gaza and also here in southern Gaza. I mean, on my left, I have tens of the bodies of people that were killed. People, the family members who came to say the last goodbye, screaming, people crying. It is undescribable situation here in the hospital. Around 3 hours ago, the Palestinian Health Ministry said in a statement that the number of Palestinians killed in the past 3 weeks is 5,791, including 2,360 children. But I can tell you by standing here that the number has exceeded at least 5,800. The situation, it's a chaos here at the Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital, which is located in southern Gaza in Deir al-Balah city. And actually, most of the people who were killed during Israeli strikes in the past hours here in Deir al-Balah are people from Gaza City, people who fled their homes from northern Gaza and from central Gaza City and came here to take shelter at either relatives' homes, hospitals, schools. This is the situation from my side now.
Well, a slightly unstable connection to you, Noor, but we're going to carry on. And I want to ask you about some reports that the IDF is asking people in the city of Khan Yunis for information about the hostages. What do we know about that?
Well, yes, not only in Khan Yunis, but here in Deir al-Balah, actually, we were looking at the sky and we saw thousands of leaflets that the Israeli warplanes threw over middle Gaza and southern Gaza. The papers basically says that they are calling on the people of Gaza, the citizens, to give the IDF any information about the captives. If they did, they will grant their safety. Their home will be safe, and also they will grant them a prize money money, basically. They also left they left numbers and also WhatsApp groups in order for the citizens to contact them. But here's the thing: the captives are with Al-Qassam Brigades, which is the militant wing for Hamas. No one really here on the ground, especially the citizens, know anything about these captives. So it's going to be really hard to give away any information. However, the citizens on the ground are hoping that the release of the captives over the past days may at least ease the things here up on the ground. However, we're not seeing that. What we're seeing here on the ground, the continuous Israeli strikes on northern and southern Gaza, and the death and the injury of hundreds of people.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in southern Gaza. 7 people have died after a so-called super fog caused a mass pileup on a US highway. Authorities say nearly 160 vehicles were involved in the accident near New Orleans. The super fog formed after smoke from marsh fires combined with dense mist in the area. Emergency workers spent most of Monday night searching for victims. At least 25 people were taken to hospital. The inquest into New Zealand's worst mass shooting has opened in Christchurch. 51 people were killed when a white supremacist opened fire at 2 mosques in the city in 2019. The 6-week inquiry will look at 10 issues, including if the gunman had help from any other person and the response by emergency services. The findings are expected to be released next year. 1 person has been killed after 2 cargo ships collided in the North Sea. Germany's maritime agency says the accident happened 20 kilometres from the Heligoland Islands. One of the ships sank. Search teams have rescued 4 of its crew, while 2 others are missing. The second ship is still afloat, with 22 people on board. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. 3 months after its election, Spain may finally have a new coalition government, if Parliament can agree on the deal.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. More than 700 Palestinians killed in Gaza by airstrikes in the last 24 hours as Israel intensifies its bombardment of the enclave. Brutality and mercy, a description of her treatment by one of 2 elderly hostages released by Hamas on Monday night. And President Macron says France stands with Israel today, tomorrow and the day after, but calls for a decisive relaunch of the Palestinian peace process. In Spain, Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party has reached an agreement to form a new government with the country's hard-left Sumar party. The deal comes after an inconclusive election 3 months ago resulted in a hung parliament. But the deal still needs to be backed by Parliament. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ken Brown, who's in Madrid. So, Ken, this deal doesn't actually guarantee the formation of a government, does it?
Well, exactly, Robin. I think a lot of people did a double take today when they saw the headlines that a coalition agreement had been reached, thinking, oh, finally, 93 days after the election, we finally have a government here in Spain. But that's not really the case. What we saw today was an agreement between the Socialist PSOE party and the hard left platform Sumar on a roadmap moving forward if a coalition government can be reached or can be achieved. Now, that really depends on the Catalan separatist party, Junts, and their leader, Carles Puigdemont, who's been in exile since 2017 after the illegal Catalan independence referendum. Now, their price for supporting this coalition would be, at very least, an amnesty for Puigdemont so that he could return to Spain. Now, there is also talk that they may also want some framework for a future legal independence referendum. Sanchez has already red flagged that one. He says he will only negotiate within the constitution. So those negotiations carry on. We do not have a government yet in Spain, and Sanchez has until the 27th of November to form that government. If he doesn't manage to do that, we'll go back to elections in January. That would be Spain's 6th general elections in 9 years. But Sanchez did sound confident today. We heard him say that we've been in power for 5 years and we will be for 4 more.
So the issue of Catalan independence, one thing the two parties have been talking about. What have they actually agreed on, though, in terms of policy?
Yes, so we've seen a really broad swathe of policy presented today, over 230 measures. Really, it's a continuance of what we've seen over the past 4-year mandate. Sumar and PSOE have been in government during that time. One of the eye-catching policies was reducing the working week from 40 hours to 37.5, also, and that without any reduction in salary. Also, attempts to raise the minimum wage. Again, Spain has one of the lowest in Europe, trying to tackle youth unemployment, one of the highest levels in Europe here of that in Spain. We also saw the housing crisis high on the list. Soaring rent and house prices have locked many people out of owning their own home. We also have a flatlining birth rate here, an aging population. Also talk of the green transition and lowering carbon emission targets for the future. Also extending the controversial windfall taxes on banks and energy companies. Now, Spain would remain strongly pro-EU. There was also a lot of talk about the social contract. Yolanda Díaz, who's the leader of Sumar, talked about Spain being a feminist country, but that more needed to be done, particularly in the area of machismo, or male violence against women. It's a list of promises that Yolanda Díaz said meant a happy day for Spain, but the conservative opposition leader, Alberto Núñez Feijóo, was not in agreement. He called it a big pile of wet paper, Robin.
Ken, thanks very much. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid. Leaders of Poland's three-way opposition alliance say they're ready to take power. If successful, the coalition will be headed by former European Council President Donald Tusk, who has served once before as Prime Minister. President Andrzej Duda began talks with party leaders on Tuesday, more than a week after the ruling Conservative PIS lost its majority. Under Poland's constitution, the president names a candidate prime minister, who then forms a cabinet that's put to a confidence vote. The UK is hoping to cash in on the growing market for electric vehicles. The batteries that power them are made using a metal called lithium. Several companies are now mining lithium in southwest England, as experts say that demand is set to surge. Our correspondent Paul Hawkins reports.
The Trelava pit. Formerly a China clay mine, it's now one of Europe's frontiers in what some are calling the white gold rush. After 3 years of drilling, Cornish Lithium say the site is commercially viable.
This is a traditional mining operation where they're extracting mineral from rock, and at the moment they're drilling down about 120 metres on average and taking out samples of quartz, laying them in piles, and then the geologists will come along and they'll take samples of these piles of quartz to see how much lithium is inside them.
The company says this mine will be fully operational by 2026 and will last 20 years.
In the Trelava project, which is our hard rock project, that'll produce around 10,000 tonnes of lithium carbonate equivalent a year. So the number is something like around 200,000 cars. That would be roughly about 10% or a bit more than the UK will require by 2030.
We're now going to see a much newer type of mining where they extract the mineral directly from the water. It's pioneering technology. They're in the exploration phase and they're trying to work out how much there is in the ground. They think there's a lot, but they're trying to work out how much there is and whether it's commercially viable.
The problem with getting lithium out of rock is it takes a lot of energy. Getting it out of water, on the other hand, from deep underground is easier and greener.
And what we've got is the granite and then the sort of sediments on top. So what we do is we drill down into these structures and then we can pump up the structures back to surface to our plant.
Lithium was first discovered in Cornwall back in 1864, but back then no one had any use for it.
So we've drilled down to about 1.8 kilometres, and what we have now is a team of geologists who are installing a Packer system, which is essentially a big balloon to isolate the structures that we saw in the drill core and then test them by pumping that water to surface. Mining is almost the wrong term for it. It's water
I was going to
processing.
say, can you call it mining? It's more like water extraction.
Yeah, water extraction, mineral extraction.
From our geothermal water side, that could be significantly more. And yet we don't yet know. We're in the relatively early stages, but every single drill hole we've drilled so far has been successful, and we're really, really excited about the potential there.
The last mine closed in 1998, leaving the county reliant on seasonal tourism. It's now one of the most economically and socially deprived areas in Europe.
I'm positive. I feel positive about it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
We need to use what's here.
It should be coming back because there's so much of the mines that have still got stuff in that.
It'll bring a lot of investment, a lot of jobs, a lot of money.
I happen to disagree, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, on account of its effect on natural beauty and its effect on the environment.
Our Trelava project is an existing open pit or quarry. The damage to that has been done long ago. We're going to be very careful about how we mine that project. Our geothermal waters lithium projects are, you wouldn't see very little at all on surface. It's a borehole, it's high tech, but you wouldn't see much.
There's a Cornish word that sums up our race to net zero: directly. It means the task will be completed, but it's unlikely to be in the immediate future. Paul Hawkins, CGTN, Cornwall.
The headlines again. More than 700 Palestinians killed in Gaza by airstrikes in the last 24 hours as Israel intensifies its bombardment of the enclave. Brutality and mercy, the description of her treatment by one of two elderly hostages released by Hamas on Monday night. And President Macron says France stands with Israel today, tomorrow and the day after, but calls for a decisive relaunch of the Palestinian peace process. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.